Thanks so much for coming on the channel. I see your username is Right America, and basically this all started because we started talking in Instagram DMs, and I think you accused me of cherry picking when I brought up the Bible verse where God commanded King Saul to murder women, men, children, and infants. So do you want to we can just kind of take it from there and see where we go from here?
Yeah. So basically, like when I saw the Bible verse, I mean, it said like Samuel told Saul, and I know the whole thing where like the Bible is divinely inspired, blah blah blah.
Not
Like I
even
have my,
that. It's like Samuel was directly relaying a message that he received from the Lord.
I mean, I just saw like the screenshot that like was posted on your story. I'm gonna be honest, like I didn't go and read the whole verse, but from what I could tell, it was just Samuel telling Saul. Like in
Samuel
that.
said to Saul, I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you. This is what the Lord Almighty says. That's what it says there.
All right.
So,
I mean,
I mean, it was definitely from God in that case.
yeah. I just feel like, I mean, I know the Bible is supposedly like divinely inspired, but it is through people. And I mean, I have my, problems with parts of the Bible, and I feel like maybe God did like send Samuel like as a prophet, but it doesn't mean that everything that he says is like directly from God.
No, that's,
Like
and
it,
sure, I mean, I can appreciate the argument of, well, it's also written by men, maybe there were mistakes. The problem is then, how do you differentiate between the parts of the Bible that are from God and the parts of the Bible that are, just mistakes from men?
I mean, I would feel like if the Bible kind of like contradicts itself, then that's when like I guess like if it contradicts like the Ten Commandments say like you shall not kill. I feel like that could kind of be like proven to be a mistake or
But God
like
killed himself, right? So, like, God killed the firstborn sons of Egypt. That was God, in that case, directly violating the Ten Commandments that he would later give Moses.
I mean, I feel like we don't know exactly what happened through history, and maybe that was like, I mean, that is Old Testament, and I know a lot of Christians especially will say like, "Oh, that's too Old Testament for me." Like, I don't believe that. And I don't mean like everything in the Old Testament is like fake, but we don't really know if like all the firstborn sons really were killed.
Well, yeah,
Um,
I mean, I don't think any of that really happened at all, but it's more so that people read that as being from God, and that God in the Bible is described as deliberately killing the firstborn sons. The problem is where you can't differentiate. I understand that some parts of the Bible you might want to say, well, those are a mistake. That was from men. But you realize that that means that you're actually the one cherry picking, right? Because you're basically picking and choosing which verses that you like and then just rejecting the verses that are kind of, inconvenient.
well, I feel like, I mean, maybe that story was a like exaggeration or a mistake or something that like
Yeah, but how
shouldn't
do you
really
know?
be.
Maybe the story about Jesus rising from the dead was also an exaggeration.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it could be. It might not be. I mean, obviously, I wasn't there to know. And like I said, I mean, I have my problems with the Bible. I mean, I used to be a like complete atheist, and I've kind of like had an experience that like brought me back to God, but I feel like a lot of like what the Catholic Church as an institution is kind of like corrupt, and I mean through history they kind of decided like what books were in the Bible, I mean, there was like a whole
Mhm.
I forget what it's called, like a convention. I forget what it was actually called, but or the council. It was like a council of Nicaea or something, and they decided like what would be in the Bible, and there were tons of books that were decided not to be put in the Bible, and then
Right, right.
there were obviously books that they decided to put into the Bible. So I feel like they kind of picked and chose what they were gonna put in the Bible, and
I
I
mean,
feel
yeah,
like there
you're
are a
right,
lot of
they did.
mistakes.
They did. Yeah, and I think there were probably a lot of mistakes, sure, but I feel like that only speaks volumes to the unreliability of the Bible.
Well, I
Because then how
did.
do you know? How do you know any of it's legit? Like, that's why people usually have to appeal to um, the divine revelation thing. It's basically, well, how do they pick and choose? God inspired them and helped them realize which were the correct ones and which were the wrong ones. So they basically figured out the right ones to put on or put into the Bible. I feel like if you're not going to take the divine inspiration route, then how do you justify anything in the Bible? And how do you tell what's the mistake and what's actually from God? It kind of, no matter what, falls back on cherry picking. And the thing is, I don't think cherry picking is necessarily bad. Like, there are good parts of the Bible that can probably be cherry picked. But when you accuse me of cherry picking, especially in a negative connotation, it seems as if the only way you can actually follow the Bible is if you literally cherry pick.
Well, I mean, I do want to say I didn't actually like deliberately say like you're cherry picking. I just said like Samuel, not Saul, when I replied. But I feel like with the whole like Bible thing, I mean, the whole I know like you posted that on your story in kind of in response to like Roe v. Wade, and it was something like, God says don't abort, don't like do abortion, but like this Bible verse said like it's fine to kill.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it kind of like the Bible doesn't say anywhere, abortion is wrong. It's just that like
Sure.
it's almost like a greater thing. It's not even like directly part of the Bible. It's kind of that naturally, and I mean religion would say like through God, like a child is conceived,
Mm-hmm.
and you would be kind of playing God if you like end that pregnancy or kill that fetus.
Sure, and the thing
And
is that I mean, I was obviously posting that verse initially to, of course, be a bit inflammatory, as I always am. I mean,
yeah,
it's more just, I think it speaks volumes when people, especially like strong, loud, and proud evangelical Christians, are preaching nonstop about how bad abortion is when their God, who they believe is the ultimate moral foundation, has participated in the same kind of thing, only far worse. So I just feel like it points out the hypocrisy, more or less. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's obviously fine to cherry pick parts of the Bible, I guess, but I just feel like it's probably not too fair to use that as a negative on me because I mean, I'm not cherry picking. Like I'm just reading the Bible and interpreting it how it is said.
yeah. I mean, I just feel like, I mean, like I said before, I know it kind of could be seen as cherry picking, but there are parts of the Bible that could be could be completely made up just to make, just to kind of instill fear of God among people,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the Old Testament, because like if you remember, I mean, in the Old Testament, God had never been like Jesus hadn't come yet, so it was all just through the word of prophets. And I mean, if we just assume that like 100% of maybe not the Bible, but like all the prophets really were, at least thought they were speaking from God. It's not like God like actually came and like talked to them. It would be more of like God kind of talking through them. So,
Yeah, but I mean,
they
in
could.
regards to what the verse that I was referencing, the first Samuel verse where Saul was told to go kill the children and men and women and everything, um, he was also commanded to kill the oxen and the livestock. And instead of doing that, he brought it back with him to instead sacrifice them to the Lord. And because he disobeyed God, he was then punished by God. So even if, like, well, some of it was from prophets, some of it wasn't, we kind of keep going back to the same problem of like, well, how do you differentiate then? How do you know that any part of the Bible is actually accurate? How do you know the story about Jesus is actually legitimate?
Well, like I said, I do have my problems with a lot of the Bible, but I feel like especially the New Testament, like the Old Testament is like ancient. I mean, it goes back
But isn't God the
supposedly all.
same? I thought that God never changes.
Well, I just mean like the parts where you kind of say like, how do we know that any of the Bible's real? I feel like the Old Testament supposedly goes all the way back from to when the earth was created, but the New Testament is starts 2,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, a lot of the things that are described in the New Testament have like thousands of witnesses. Um,
No,
and
no.
I
Well,
mean,
I mean, that's kind of a different discussion, but there are
yeah,
actually not very good records of Jesus even existing either. Like the Gospels, for example, were not written by the actual disciples. They were written by anonymous authors. We don't even know who actually wrote them. They were also written years and years after the fact. They were not actually like writing things down right as they were happening. But again, that's kind of a different discussion. I just basically all I'm saying about the initial DM is that I don't think it's fair to accuse me of cherry picking when you literally have to do the same thing, if not worse, because you have to cherry pick. Well, I'm going to ignore the Old Testament except for the Ten Commandments. I'm going to only follow the New Testament. I mean, I would be tempted to ask you, like, how do you feel about certain issues like gay people? Do you ever bring up the Levitical law to say that being gay is an abomination? Like, I'm not saying you have done that. I'm genuinely asking. But, like, if you did, then that would still be cherry picking, right? Something specifically out of the Old Testament that you happen to agree with.
yeah. Well, I feel like a lot of, I mean, if I go back like to what we were saying before, I feel like the Bible is kind of like, I mean, it's described as not one book, but like a library of books
Mm hmm.
by a lot of people like in the church, and I feel like it's kind of to um like describe what that time was like and what a lot of like how there were different people like prophets could have been wrong and stuff, and I feel like they didn't really do a good job putting it together
Hmm.
because I feel like there have to be things that are true or somewhat true in the Bible, but there also have to be things that are false, and they don't really. I feel like it's all just kind of put there as like almost like a record of what happened, and then it's left to like the
Doesn't
reader of the
this
Bible.
doesn't this kind of speak volumes against the validity of the God of the Bible then? Because why then would his supposed book, which is supposed to help all of us understand how to have a relationship with God, be so convoluted? Have so many parts that are not correct or parts that were translated wrong or maybe this thing isn't right. To me, that sounds like it speaks volumes against the validity of that God.
Well, I feel like the Old Testament. I mean, especially, I feel like the New Testament is really. I'm talking more about the Old Testament when I like talk about how there things wrong, things right. I feel like it's more of like a guide, and then it's left, and then like, I mean, the biggest part of religion isn't reading the Bible; it's having a relationship with God,
Yeah, but how
and
are
the
you supposed to
Bible.
have that relationship? Isn't the Bible supposed to kind of lead to that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the Bible's meant to be like a guide and like you said like lead to that relationship, but it's definitely not like the end all be all of religion. And I mean, there are definitely and I also feel like a lot of things today, like a
Mm-hmm.
lot of like political issues are kind of, they're obviously not talked about in the Bible. Like abortion, I don't think is mentioned in the Bible.
Well, there's
Um,
only one verse where God actually aborts a child, or at least commands someone to give a cursed drink to a woman in which she would have miscarriages over and over again, or something like that. I honestly, I feel like your approach here is more or less viewing like the Old Testament as being very metaphorical, kind of like, well, these are
yeah.
metaphors or parables that we can kind of gauge from and see like what can we learn from this. And I think I can respect that honestly, but I feel like at all, if anything, before we maybe move on to another subject here, I feel like it's not completely fair for you to have accused me of cherry picking because very few people actually hold that view. I've heard many, many people tell me that the Bible is infallible. That's how I was raised anyway, that the Bible was infallible. It was absolutely the inspired word of God. God is never wrong. So things in the Bible cannot be wrong. That's just kind of the approach that I was taught. So maybe that's where we had the disagreement. But if you have anything else you want to say on that, I'm fine. But I also was scrolling through your Instagram and there's a couple things here I disagree with that you've posted before. If you want to talk about
Uh,
any of that.
all right. Just pick one. I don't really have any preference.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I can kind of give you the three, and then we'll see where we go from here. Is some of these are old, so this one's from September of 2020, but you posted Joe Biden's new ad on how he'll fix the China virus. I disagree with that one. The one where you said there's going to be, where Biden says there are at least three genders. It seems that that was posted to mock him. I don't actually disagree with that. I think that that's true, that there probably are at least three genders right now. um, and then you also posted this one that I disagree with, which is the MLK one, where it said how it started versus how it's going. And you show MLK marching, and then you show the other picture of the BLM like riots with the fire behind them.
Well, I can start with that one. Just to say, like the Joe Biden quote and stuff. My Instagram started out. It was called Daily Joe Biden, and it was like during the 2020 election, and every day I would post a new Joe Biden like gaffe kind of or quote. But
Mm.
I'll start with like the MLK one.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, that was kind of like that might be seen as like a criticism of like MLK or like, oh, it led to riots. That's not really like what I meant
Well, it
by
seems like
that.
it's a criticism of modern day BLM.
Yeah, yeah, that's what it's just kind of it was meant to be kind of like shining a light on how it started out as like or like I mean it's not even like the same thing. Like it's kind of like MLK was all for peaceful protest and like I mean I totally support like what he stood for.
No, no.
Um
By the way, I don't.
yeah.
Just to be clear, I don't think that this is a meme shitting on MLK at all. It looks to me like this is a meme shitting on modern day BLM movement, which I am heavily in favor of. And I feel like this is kind of like a dishonest framing almost because one, MLK was a central leader to a specific movement. There's no central leader to BLM nowadays. And the second thing is that although MLK pushed for peaceful protests, there were also some riots, during the civil rights movement. And even more so, there were memes from the day, like comic strips, that painted MLK as being involved in violent riots. There's one from the 60s I can show you where it shows MLK standing, and behind him is drawn a picture of a burning city. And MLK is saying, hey, I plan on holding another peaceful protest tomorrow. And it's like identical to the same talking points today, which is really what I'm getting at is the obfuscation. Like, were there riots? Yes. Are riots bad? Absolutely. Should you riot? Fuck no. But there's more to this than just riots, right? Like, BLM is an actual movement that's fighting for something legit.
Well, I think that like BLM is just I mean I get why especially during like after the murder of George Floyd it made people mad, but I feel like a lot of like the BLM riots were kind of hijacking the whole like hijacking the death of George Floyd and hijacking people that actually are like concerned and part of
Sure.
like I guess the good part. I
But
mean,
then why would
I
you?
don't.
But do you realize the way I agree with you, by the way, that the rioters were largely hijacking an otherwise good movement. But why would you draw attention to the people that are hijacking this rather than being aware of the fact that, like, hey, riots are bad, but the BLM protesters, the actual people that are interested in legitimately protesting, are trying to push for a change here. And it's not just because George Floyd, it's an overall recognition of systemic racism and the way black people are disproportionately victimized by police violence. And the entirety of the BLM movement was really trying to draw attention to that, to the underlying systemic racism.
I mean, I think that BLM, like the movement itself, not the riots,
Mm-hmm.
is it means well, but I think that I guess it's not really. I feel like it kind of blows certain issues out of proportion, and I feel like it kind of I guess pushes the notion that there's like a lot of systemic racism, and I mean, I sure like definitely in the past, like with things like redlining, that's total systemic racism. But I feel like today we really don't have that.
Well,
I
you're
mean,
right that we don't have redlining anymore, but the systemic racism thing is a lot more nuanced than that. I think when people hear systemic racism, they're pretty quick to think like, okay, there's no law in place that says like black people bad, so how can there be systemic racism? But usually that refers to something far more broad, which is just a system in place, whether it is a legal system like the criminal justice system or even a social system that disproportionately negatively affects black people. That's what makes the system racist, is because it is disproportionately affecting one group, one ethnic group, right? So when you talk about redlining, for example, you're right, that's been done away with, but the problem is there's still systemic racism from redlining, because you can't just keep black people from building up equity and wealth in this country and then just do away with the law and expect everything to just kind of go back to normal and suddenly black people are just going to catch up. Like, that was decades upon decades of black people being kept from building up generational wealth and equity, which is still to this day leading to the disproportionate rates of poverty amongst black people. I mean, you've probably heard 1350 before, right? How 13% of the population commit 50% of the crime. It's not completely accurate, but it's true that black people tend to have a disproportionate crime rate, and that's because of poverty. And the reason they're disproportionately in poverty is because of redlining. These are all different systems at play here that are negatively affecting black people, and I think that that's ultimately what BLM is trying to bring attention to.
well, I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of people that are in poverty and have gotten out, and I feel like it's probably because a lot of like cities and inner cities, there's just it's kind of left to like people don't really care about it, and it's not 100% black people. There's people of all different races living in those areas, and
That's
I
true.
feel like they're all kind of oppressed through. I mean, it's like the culture of the area, or just like
Sure.
the way the area is.
And in a way, you're right, though. But see, what you're saying is still ultimately coming back to systemic racism, because if there exists a culture that is, we probably acknowledge that there is sometimes a bad culture associated with the more urban areas that are disproportionately inhabited by black people, which is, yes, very much like the gang violence or, the guns, or it's cool to be like a thug. You've seen that kind of shit before, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But the problem is like, well, why then do black people, not all black people, of course, but why do black people, at least in those areas, have that culture to begin with, right? Like, this goes back to systemic racism. So in the, when was it? It was like the 70s, when Nixon implemented the drug war. there was already a disproportionate amount of drug usage going on in those black communities. And so the drug war was purposely put in place to try and disproportionately fuck over black people. And in doing so, that created this sort of rift that you have, that we're still dealing with today, where there's just this distrust of police, right? And it's actually like a sociological fact that when you live in a community that is very adversarial with the police, the actual established authority, you tend to form other groups that you view as being protective or keeping the community safe. And in many ways, those were
Like
gangs.
gangs.
Yeah. So you're right that there is a bad culture there. Absolutely. But that culture still comes from systemic racism, which is why, like, I a lot of times agree with you, generally speaking, like the crime rate or the poverty or the culture, but you can't just expect everybody to just not do things anymore or do better. There obviously is some kind of system at play here. Otherwise, it just wouldn't make sense that black people are still to this day disproportionately in poverty and disproportionately committing crime.
Well, I would say, I mean, I don't know what the solution would be to, like, I mean, I agree that it has had long-term effects on areas that are where a lot of black people live, especially like from the effects of redlining,
And keep in mind,
from the
redlining
war
was
on drugs.
implemented initially as an attempt to further racism. Like, even new
Yeah,
suburbs that were built, and I can send you proof of this, it was a literal requirement that if the bank, the Federal Housing Administration, was to fund these suburbs being built, one of their requirements was that you do not sell to black people. So nowadays, it kind of fucks over poor people in general. But the reason black people are disproportionately poor is because this system exists that originally started overtly racist.
well, I just don't know. I mean, those systems aren't in place anymore, and I know that there have been effects on maybe not like the people, but just like the area over time. But I feel like we've gotten rid of those things, and I guess like what would your solution be to fix inner cities and like get rid of like the problems?
Yeah, I've
Because
talked about this a couple different times. And usually, I mean, I just say that I think investing in those areas is really important. And even though I'm a liberal soy boy cuck or whatever, I still find Donald Trump's idea as far as the opportunity zones to be something really good. Basically,
yeah,
incentivize building or incentivize businesses to open up in that area. But the problem is that a lot of the times those businesses open up and then they are exploitative. And rather than doing what they're meant to do, which is hire more black people and invest in the community and build up the community and build the wealth up around the community, it's cheaper over there. So they basically just take advantage of it. We've seen like investors, for example, take advantage of it. So I think something like that could be effective, though, if we had incentives for businesses to open up and set up and build in these areas while also making sure there were restrictions on it to make sure that they're not exploited, to make sure that they actually hire people from the community, hence giving more jobs, building the local economy. These kind of things can absolutely be done. The main problem is just that like it's not really fair to just say, well, it's just the black culture, or well, black people need to work harder, because it's true that people should work hard, and it's true that having a bad culture can have negative effects, but I think you would probably have to agree that unless all black people in this area are just stupid and lazy, it doesn't make sense that black people for the so long now have disproportionately been having higher crime rates and disproportionate rates of poverty, right?
yeah, yeah. And I mean, I was gonna bring up the opportunity zones thing. I feel like that is a good thing. Um, like having lower taxes in an area, like putting money into an area. Um, and I mean, I feel like over time that'll fix things. And I think that the reason that there's a higher percentage of crime and poverty and stuff like in the black community, it's because a lot of black people live in these areas. And if it was a lot of white people living in these areas, it would be the same thing.
You're right.
It just happens to be because black people are, but it
Yes,
doesn't mean
you're
that
totally
it's
right.
yeah.
You're literally like you're getting it, and I'm not saying that condescendingly. You're right that like you can look historically, white Italians when they first came to America, they were living in poverty and they had disproportionately high crime rates. It's just that obviously if you are poor, you're more likely to commit crime because you're poor, you're desperate, you're willing to do
Yeah.
things that you otherwise wouldn't do to make ends meet. And so you're right that if it were the other way around, if it were white people put in these areas, you would see higher crime rates then also. It's nothing to do with like black people being black. It's genetic. It's obviously nothing like that.
Yeah.
But again, black people are disproportionately in these areas because of the historical racist policies and even current racist policies that are still happening, like the drug war, which most people are actually kind of against that now. So
Yeah.
it's like that's the ultimate goal of BLM, though, is to try and bring attention to these issues. And then finally, not to be too long-winded, but even when it comes to the police violence, right? Like people will bring up George Floyd and they'll say, well, Derek Chauvin wasn't racist. And they're right. Derek Chauvin, I don't think was like racist trying to kill a black person. What it was is that Derek Chauvin demonstrated by killing George Floyd an underlying issue, which is that because there's disproportionate crime rates in these areas, there are disproportionately high levels of policing. And disproportionately high levels of policing only leads to, again, disproportionate victimization of police violence. So it's like it's much larger problem that I will admit the BLM movement doesn't really give great answers to. But I think that ultimately that's what BLM's trying to push forward, you know?
Yeah. I'm glad we were able to like find some agreement, and I've got to go now, like,
Okay.
because I'm just driving over to work,
Okay.
but I have work at 2. But it was a good debate.
Good talk, man. And I hope that you'll do you think you'll think about what I talked to you about?
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for the convo, man. You have a good rest of your day.
All right. You too.
Wow, that was actually a good conversation. What do you know? I feel like I might have been able to get through I feel like I may have gotten through to that guy. I feel like he seems like he was in a place where he was willing to understand. And I think that's really cool. Yeah, I think give it a little time. I feel like that guy might change his mind on some stuff. Pretty cool. Very cool. Nice and good faith. Can you please upload that? Yeah, sure. It just seems that people generally like the more hostile engagements more. But every now and then, a good faith conversation can be really beneficial. Cool. I hope he comes back and tells me that I helped change his mind. That'd be really encouraging. I see a bunch of people getting mad at some dude in chat. Does he want to talk? Did he say something about like rap music or something? I don't know. One of the good ones. I loved how you brought up how redlining is still having effects. Thanks. I mean, I brought it up plenty of different times before in the past. Sometimes I'm like, actually, you know what's weird, guys, is sometimes I'm hesitant to make the arguments because I feel like you guys have already heard me make the arguments so many times. It's like, all right, Hunter, we've heard you say this a fucking 1,000 times, okay? Like, we've heard you. We know that argument already. But sometimes I just stop caring when the person I'm talking to is actually somebody who seems like they're open to actually having their mind changed, you know? It was very comprehensive. Sure, that's good. I feel like I post enough, like, really hostile debates, though, to also have, like, good, wholesome shit sometimes. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and click the bell so you get notified when I drop a new video.